Hi, my name's Alexander Walsh. I'm 23 years old. I'm from Palos Verdes, California, and I used to be the #3 youth snowboarder in the country. When I was about 8 years old, my parents took me to Mammoth Mountain, California for my first time, where I first skied, and then the following weekend we went back up for Memorial Day, and I tried snowboarding for my first time and immediately fell in love with it. Initially, I fell in love with snowboarding because its similarities to skateboarding, and being outdoors and the adrenaline that being strapped in the snowboard and riding down the mountain gave me. I think my snowboard career technically started when I found out that I actually was pretty good at snowboarding, and my parents could see it in me as well. So they moved me up to Mammoth full time, where I began participating in snowboard competitions and started getting recognition. And later on, I got sponsored by Quicksilver, Vans, ProTech, Crew, and a couple other clothing companies, where they started to help me travel around and do competitions for youth snowboarding. My main influence through snowboarding, his name was Tyler Flanagan. At the time, I was probably 8 or 9 years old, and he was a professional snowboarder at Mammoth Mountain. And his dad actually trained him growing up, and he also trained another youth snowboarder by the name of Brock Crouch, who ended up being my best friend and taking me under his wing. And I still remember the first day I went to pretty much my idol's house, and he gave me a signed snowboard, which I later started riding. And that's where everything really took off, because I started becoming trained by somebody who was serious in the sport. So after I started training with Brock Crouch and Tyler Flanagan's dad, that's where everything started to take off. We started getting invited through recognition of our snowboarding to places in the US like Colorado, Tahoe, the East Coast, other big mountains where competitions were called nationals, and all the best snowboarders in that age group would come together to place for the top 3 best in the country. So I went on to compete for about 4 or 5 years all around the country, and I competed in slopestyle and halfpipe. Slopestyle was jumps and rails, which you'd see in like X Games and the Olympics and action sports venues such as those. The best I ever got was 3rd place 2 years in a row, so I guess you could say that I was the 3rd best 12 and 13-year-old in the country for snowboarding, which for me was pretty good, you know. And basically my sponsors, the big ones at least, like Quicksilver and Vans, would pay for me to travel around the world, or not around the world, around the US, and give me basically all the clothes and boards and boots and everything that I needed to compete in those aspects of snowboarding. In order to maintain this level of competition, I had to continue living in Mammoth full time, because if I wasn't on the snow basically every day of the winter, it wasn't enough to stay at that level of snowboarding for my age. So it definitely took a toll on my family and took me away from my friends who I grew up with. I was homeschooled, so I didn't really have too much connection with other kids. I have to say it definitely took a toll on my family in the fact that we were basically separated many times, and for long periods of time of the year. When I'd be traveling with my mom, or I'd be traveling with my dad, I'd be away from my sister, and they would be away from each other. And so yeah, I think after a few years I could see kind of the separation coming in between my parents, and I think that was the beginning of my downfall in snowboarding. Then came one summer I was practicing for snowboarding, and I broke my left femur on the trampoline trying certain tricks that I wanted to learn that next season. And so I had to get surgery, and it was almost 8-month recovery time. And then that following year at a skateboarding camp, I broke my other leg. And I think both of them coming together kind of stopped my snowboarding at a halt, because I wasn't able to do it as much as I once was. You know, it's a weird thing to look back on. And I'm still grateful every day that I get to live in such a beautiful place, and that I got the experiences that I had in my life. If I had any advice to anyone that may be watching this, I'd say seize the moment and do what you love.